All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down this really provocative piece from a blog called The Appalachian Gorilla. And honestly, it asks some deeply uncomfortable questions. Questions about health, freedom, and just what the role of the state should be. It frames our national health crisis in a way you have probably never heard before. So let's just walk through the author's arguments step by step. So, the author kicks things off with a series of really striking analogies to frame the problem. And it starts with this one. Imagine you own a zoo. Your whole livelihood depends on those monkeys being healthy and active for visitors. Would you be careful about what you feed them? Of course you would. It's just common sense, right? And the argument just builds from there. The author points out that we give detailed advice to new pet owners, what food to buy, how much exercise the animal needs. But when it comes to our own people, the piece argues we don't just fail to advise, we actually subsidize what the author flat out calls poison. Now, this isn't just some philosophical rant. The author grounds this whole thing in some pretty stark numbers. And the first one is a real gut punch. A staggering 74% of the entire U.S. population is considered overweight. 74%. And if you zoom in on that number, the problem gets even more severe. We're not just talking about a few extra pounds here. According to the author's sources, a full 40% of the population isn't just overweight, they are clinically obese. That's a serious medical condition with massive health consequences. And the fallout? Well, it isn't just physical, it's economic. Big time. The author cites an annual loss of $1.7 trillion. That's money lost every single year because of obesity's impact on productivity. So the argument is, this has stopped being about individual choices. It's now a national crisis that's draining the country's economic lifeblood. Okay, this question right here, this is the pivot point for the entire article. This is where the whole thing shifts from just being a health issue to a fundamental question about our identity and what we owe each other. And it's really just the launching pad for a series of even tougher questions. And here comes that cascade. The questions just keep escalating. Does poor health hurt productivity? Does it kill innovation? And then the focus shifts to the corporations. Should we be looking at their addictive practices? And then comes the really radical idea. Is it okay to literally destroy companies to fix this problem? Would we actually be better off without them? So this all leads the author to what they see as this fundamental and, frankly, irreconcilable conflict. On one side, you have nationalism, which the author defines really simply, just caring for your people. And on the other, you have capitalism, which is defined as profiting from them. The piece basically argues you cannot do both of those things at the same time. They're at war with each other. And this one sentence, this is really the core diagnosis of the whole problem. It frames the entire health crisis not as a bunch of individual failures of willpower, but as the inevitable result of an economic system that is, at its very core, opposed to the well-being of its own people. So, okay, let's move on to the author's proposed alternative. And it's not socialism or communism, not at all. The author actually calls themselves a communitarian, and they're advocating for an ideology where community, family, and especially culture, they all act as these protective assets, like a shield for the nation's people. The argument here is that these old traditions weren't just random rules. The author points to things like Ramadan fasting or kosher food laws as these vital historical guardrails. They were cultural habits that naturally regulated what people ate and how they ate it, which ultimately kept them healthier. But the author claims capitalism came in and just completely corrupted this system. It took these cultural foods, many of which were meant for special feasts and celebrations, and, in the author's words, bastardized them, turned them into cheap, mass-produced everyday meals that are stripped of their cultural meaning and, frankly, their nutritional value. Okay, so this brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most radical and controversial part of the entire article. We've gone through the diagnosis of the problem, we've looked at the ideological framework, but what's the actual prescription? What does the author think we should do about all this? So the author frames drastic intervention as a moral duty. It's presented as this profound act of love, almost like a national tough love program that's needed to stop people from, and these are the author's words, destroying themselves and the future of the nation. This quote just perfectly captures the author's perspective. Eating certain foods is put on the exact same level as hard drug addiction. The logic is, look, if you would physically intervene to stop a loved one from shooting heroin, then why wouldn't you do the same to stop what the author calls suicide by food?
And believe it or not, the author pushes this analogy even further. They use a personal, and you could say even more extreme example to justify this level of intervention. So, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is the author's belief that there's no moral difference between these things. Chaining a loved one to a radiator to stop them from getting drugs is presented as the same as forcefully stopping them from eating unhealthy food. In this worldview, both are desperate but necessary acts of love. And that's where the article leaves us. We've basically journeyed through this author's entire argument, a diagnosis that mixes public health data with a fierce critique of capitalism, leading to a prescription for radical, forceful intervention. And it all comes down to this one deeply challenging question about the boundaries of liberty, personal responsibility, and what it really means to love and care for one another.